All right, Tammy, it's all yours. Take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Brenner, and welcome to Controlled Environmental Productions Growing Undercover. Um, like I said, Tammy Brenner. I'm the manager of the plant growth facilities here on main campus. I'm also the interim Controlled Environmental Agriculture State Specialist for CSU Extension. Today, along with Drew Walters and Chris Hilgert, we will be presenting the second tour or second of four webinars in controlled environmental agriculture. Of course, it's not going to let me go. Proceed. Hang on. There we go. Before we get started, Colorado State University Extension is an equal opportunity provider. Colorado State University does not discriminate on the basis of disability and is committed to providing reasonable accommodations. CSU's Office of Engagement and Extension ensures meaningful access and equal opportunities to participate to individuals whose first language is not English. To learn more about CSU's principles of community and our local or our land acknowledgement, please scan the QR code on the bottom. So first, last month we talked about exploring controlled environmental agriculture, also known as CEA. And it was really designed to look at an introduction of agriculture from the or controlled environmental agriculture from the very beginning of history, including this really cool specularia. This was the first known greenhouse structure on record, found in about 30 AD. It was basically a three-sided structure made out of wood or stone, covered in specularia, which is essentially a mica. It's like a gypsum-made material mica. It'll come up a lot because I kind of think it's very cool. So basically they had this, and then they put a plant on a cart and they moved it in and out on cool days, but it's sunny and cool nights, just to kind of protect the crop. The intention was the Emperor Tiberius really wanted to have year-round growing of melons and cucumbers. And this is a huge advancement for the time, and it was really kind of cool. Then after I got done rambling about that, Cassie went into indoor seed starting and looked at the basics of seed starting, supplies, timing, and pro tips. Maybe some of you guys got inspired and started growing some seeds from start. And then Jake started talking about introduction of hydroponics and the advancements that it can do, and also a very simple basic demonstration of the benefits that it has of growing higher yields and larger plants in a shorter amount of time, and then did an introduction of a DIY system at home. It was very exciting, at least for me, and maybe you guys got inspired on that and decided to start or build your own DIY hydroponic system, hopefully. So this month, we started off last month doing seeds and starting indoors. This month, we're going into season extension. Colorado has over 250 days of sunshine a year, but our growing season, as you guys know, varies from 80 degrees or 80 days to 120 days, really depending on what part of Colorado you live in, down here on the plains or up in the high country. So to get a jump start on some crops, things to take a little bit longer than 120 days, like tomatoes and peppers, you can really start those indoors, either through indoor seed starting in the kitchen or under one of these. These structures, so either low tunnels over here or little hobby greenhouses like this, play really an important role in season extension, either earlier in the spring or later into the fall. They protect crops from adverse weather conditions. We've never heard of hail in Colorado ever. And they also create that perfect little environment for plants to protect them. And then they grow higher yields or produce higher yields, and you can harvest a little earlier. So today we'll be talking about greenhouses and high tunnels. on how to extend the season a little bit about different structures. So Drew will be talking about different structures of greenhouses and show a little virtual tour of greenhouses, which he did such a cool job on. I'm very excited about that. And Chris is going to go more into the low tunnels, high tunnels, and simple methods that you can extend the seasons. Before we get started on the details of that, why do greenhouses and high tunnels work? The simple answer is the greenhouse effect. Yes, they protect plants from the elements, from wind, hail, storms, etc., but they also provide additional heat. They're designed to maximize sunlight penetration through transparent material like polycarbonate, glass, acrylic, or even mica, if you so choose to do so. The sun's rays are then absorbed by the plant, soil, and other surfaces, and the light energy is converted into heat. The heat is trapped by the covering or glazing, and since the heat emitted from the plants and other surfaces are short waves, they stay trapped in the greenhouse, in the structure, if you will. This results in keeping greenhouses at least 10 degrees cooler, warmer than the ambient air outside. So since I'm a greenhouse geek, I love talking about greenhouses, and clearly we have learned how to manipulate an environment with a greenhouse since 30 AD. Since then, people have gotten lots and lots of technology involved and realized the importance that greenhouses play in agriculture. They can go from multi-acre greenhouses like this one in Canada. I don't even know how many acres are involved. They're probably growing peppers or tomatoes in there, but acres and acres of greenhouses. They also have rooftop greenhouses, which are beautiful. Happens to be in University in North Carolina, where they're looking at corn, sorghum, probably tobacco in there. It's a rooftop, highly automatic, highly technical. And then you also have these beautiful, expansive conservatories designed purely for beauty and to grow full-size trees. In addition to multi-acre greenhouses, rooftops, research greenhouses, and conservatories, there are more highly technical greenhouse facilities. There are vertical farming systems everywhere. Plenty has one in northern Colorado or in Wyoming. They're vertical leafy green lettuces. They also use peppers, highly technical systems that grow peppers and have robotic arms and robotic automatic harvesting. Very technical, very beautiful, but they do have their disadvantages. We'll talk about that in a minute. The advantages of these systems is that they can be kind of grown anywhere if you have the land. They can be reduce water. My gosh, I'm rambling today. Up to 90%. I've seen up to 95% reduced water because they're circulating the system. Reduce pest and disease outbreaks because they're enclosed, and also produce higher yields, again, because they're not having the pest and disease outbreaks. They're also not having wind and hail come and wipe their crops out. But they do come at a cost. There's higher energy. These systems are not cheap. They do require supplemental lighting and supplemental heat. The more technology that you add to these systems, the more expensive. Trolleys in a greenhouse are not cheap, and nor are the robots up here. So they tend to be really only used for high value crops, leafy greens, strawberries, peppers, tomatoes, herbs, things like that want to be fresh, ready, and easy to market. But since most of us can't afford these high-tech greenhouses, nor do we have the land mass for these, the average cost of one of these is about $200 a square foot, so not something that we all have readily available, nor do we have the space for something like this. We can still grow all of these just on a smaller scale in our backyard in a small acreage that we have. I pulled up this Wayfair one that's about $500. I've used them before. They work really well for early season growing. There's a ridge vent on the side, or there's a ridge vent up on the roof. You can open the door and you can really get a good start of growing in there. You also can kind of step it up a notch going on Greenhouse Megastore for a couple thousand, several thousand more dollars. You can get a pretty industrial size greenhouse. This one has ridge vents on, or vents on the side, and it also has electrical outlets right here. And it's a little sturdier material that can handle the weather a little bit easier. And although you can't really grow these guys or grow produce year round in these the way it is without adding light and heat, you can still get a really good start on growing, extending the season, growing some plants. So let's see, where are we now? Full season crops like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, leafy greens, peas, spinach, they can all live comfortably in a little hobby greenhouse. As long as the temperatures are about 45 to 70 during the day, which is very easy to accomplish in a hobby greenhouse. At nighttime, the vents will, as long as the temperatures don't go below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, they'll be fine. They can handle short-term temperature extremes between 35 all the way up to 90 for maybe an hour or two, as long as they're properly watered. If they're too dry, they're going to freeze. And it is important to note you don't need to have any fancy bells and whistles in any of these two greenhouses, but having a thermometer with a remote sensor is a huge lifesaver. If you see that the temperature is getting 85, 90 degrees in that greenhouse, you can go over and open up a ridge vent, open up a door just to cool it off. And that will save you quite a bit. These, I think, you can get one of these remote sensors or remote thermometers at Amazon for maybe $50. So well worth the investment, and it will kind of save a little bit of anxiety. Moving on to tunnels, and Chris will go into this a lot more too. There are hoop houses, AKA high tunnels. I think it really depends on where you were brought up or where you were learned, if it's a high tunnel or a low tunnel, or a high tunnel or a hoop house. I knew it as a hoop house. And there's low tunnels, basically shorter. These are great for growing full season crops like radishes, carrots, beets, onions, and other in greenhouse crops. The radishes, carrots, beets, and onions, those don't really like to be transplanted well. So keeping them in or starting them off in a hoop house or a low tunnel is a great option, because then you're not transplanting them. And all of the crops I mentioned in the previous slide all work perfectly fine in here also. They are pretty much the same benefits. They'll be providing shelter for the plants. They'll increase the temperature a little bit, maybe not to the extreme as a greenhouse. It kind of really depends on a few scenarios, but you still do need to vent out these greenhouses. And it is important to note that since these are made of plastic sheeting, there is a risk of collapse. It is a known thing that hoop houses, high tunnels tend to collapse when there's weather that comes in, either via wind, hail. They can be easily damaged by hail or our heavy, wet spring snow. If you're paying attention to your local weather and you know that you're going to get dumped on by 2 feet of snow, you can go out there in advance, maybe not in advance, but go out there and kind of push off as much snow as you can. Do whatever you can to get that snow off. But it happens, unfortunately, as a risk to these hoop houses. But at the end of the day, you have a choice of hoop houses, low tunnels, greenhouses. They all work amazingly well for season extension. And sometimes you can do, well, oftentimes people do a combination of all of them. That is all I have. Thank you for letting me ramble on for a little while. I always get excited to, ramble on about stuff, especially greenhouses. Up next is Drew.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Tammy. That was great introduction. Thank you all for attending today. So my name is Drew Walters. I'm an agriculture specialist for Picken County Open Space and Trails, as well as serve as a county extension specialist in Picken County. So we're up in the mountains. Greenhouses are very commonly used by folks in our area. And so I'm going to kind of just go through some of the things that I've seen in the field and some useful resources. If you're thinking about kind of transitioning to a hobby greenhouse. So this picture on this slide right here is this is at a local farm. This is the nursery. So they start all their seedlings here. That's pretty much all it's used for. Um, and we'll take a little bit deeper dive into what this greenhouse, what those components look for, which serves about 3 acres of productive land. So I'm going to cover some different structures, some different systems that are common in kind of more hobby type greenhouses, some sizing considerations, and a tool that can be useful to start thinking about sizing, particularly for kind of mid to larger scale greenhouses. Um, Location and some useful ways to kind of be able to identify different microclimates, which are kind of a important aspect in Colorado, and then just some general resources. So this picture on this slide, this is a hobby greenhouse in Newcastle, Colorado. This was a pretty cool structure. It was just kind of bare bones. There was no, there's really no covering on the structure. It was just like a metal structure, and the landowners, fabricated this greenhouse out of it. I think what's cool about this structure is it kind of highlights that greenhouses can look very different, especially like if it's not an out of the box type of situation. So there are a lot of creativity sides that you can go to have your greenhouse kind of look the way you want it to and function the way you want it to. So, like I mentioned, kind of a lot of different options that you see, especially with like the hobby type greenhouses or smaller scale greenhouses. These are just a couple examples of what those can look like. I think one important aspect is thinking about long-term goals. So thinking, about especially if it's like in your backyard, not only necessarily thinking about production, but also thinking about aesthetics and things like that. There are DIY options available and they may be suitable. I think one thing that is important is just checking with your local building codes. These could be like it could be as like low as like an HOA, but it could also be county or city building codes because there might be some particular permitting that you have to do to build a greenhouse structure. And then Tammy did a great job of kind of showing some of the different kits that are available, and these are kind of out of the box. Um, Generally, those kits will have uh, kind of like some general specifications with them too, which might meet any sort of local code requirements. So these are a few different structure types. We're probably familiar with most of these, like the geodesic domes. Really, really neat type of greenhouse. Look amazing, and they can function quite well. This geodesic dome is at like 7,500 feet. It's on a open space property that the county oversees. Um, and it has what's called like climate battery, so it uses geothermal temperature control and things like that. It's a pretty neat structure and fairly small, so kind of more on the hobby scale. The Walpini type is these are neat. They're kind of built into the ground. So you see that southern aspect windows. that are collecting sunlight, so great for like winter production. This one is kind of built right into the hillside. There's dirt on top of it. You can't really see it, but it's kind of a dirt layer on top. Pretty insulated, a lot of thermal gain that you have in relatively consistent temperatures that happen in this small structure. Um, and this is just in residents' backyard in Carbondale, Colorado. Kind of on a, you generally see these a little bit larger scale. They're above ground typically. Passive solar type of greenhouses that generally have a kind of southern facing orientation for that window sidewall or the glazing sidewall. These have similar type of like climate control aspects as Walpini, but they're generally focused on collecting that heat and sun from the lower angled sun or the lower angled sun in the winter time. And then, like Tammy mentioned, kind of a high tunnel hoop house type of greenhouse, which those are very common for 3 season, but you can also use them for 4 season. As far as glazing materials, there's different types of glazing materials, and generally, type 1 through 3. Type 1 are the films. So these are low cost, they're flexible to install, so you can kind of bend them around different angles, and you can attach them with things as simple as zip ties. Usually they have like a C channel that you can lock them into, which is a little bit more structural. And they're easy to replace. The downsides of these films is they're not as durable, and then they generally have low insulation values. So typically, when we're talking about like glazings, we refer to something called an R value. That R value is the insulative value of that particular material. With films, you can do a double film system, and that's where you have like an air layer in between 2 layers of film, and that increases your R value a bit. Paneling glazing, that's type 2, a little bit more common, probably some we're pretty familiar with, especially on the hobby scale. With those examples that Tammy was showing, these types of poly panels are durable. They have a high insulation value. You can get different types. So you can get just like a single wall, you can get double, triple wall. Those have different insulation values depending on your need. They can be somewhat costly. They're rigid, and so you do have less flexibility with them. There are some panels available that do have some flexibility with them, though. So this is probably the largest category that we see in the field are panels. And then type 3 is glass. So this is kind of that traditional type of greenhouse covering material or glazing material, allows maximum light in. There are some different options. You can get double pane, triple pane glass. It is costly. They can be difficult to install and replace, and also very heavy. So the one thing about glass, though, is it does have that aesthetic type of element to it. Something with glass too to just be mindful of is you can get some like hot spots, cool spots in the greenhouse with glass instead of something like panels or films, which do a better job of diffusing light throughout the greenhouse. So I'm going to chat real quick about greenhouse systems, and to do that, I'm going to pull up a quick little tour. So this tool, which I'll share a link to, this tool is allowing you to kind of go inside of a greenhouse. We have a high-tech greenhouse with something that Tammy's really familiar with on campus, CSU Horticulture Center. And then we have a lower tech greenhouse, so seasonal. And this is the one that was on that initial page that I showed. So this hoop house right here, this is where the farm starts all their seedlings. And what you can see in here are the different systems that are involved. So you can see the seedlings are starting. You can see right here they have just an internal airflow fan. So internal airflow helps reduce pest pressures. It kind of keeps the air moving throughout the greenhouse. And they just have a simple fan like you'd have in your house. Nothing too special there. This greenhouse does have an exhaust fan.
Hey,
So,
Drew, can I
oh yeah.
interrupt?
Oh yeah.
We can't see the tour.
Oh shoot.
Yep,
Um, let me, sorry about that.
yep.
Okay, are you able to see it now?
There we go.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Um, okay, so uh, yeah, this is that greenhouse where they're starting seedlings at the farm. Um, this is a hoop house structure. There's poly walls on the end walls, and then there's poly film on the side walls. And so if we go inside of this greenhouse, we can see that they're starting seedlings here, kind of with snow outside, and they're doing it with, fairly minimal type of environmental controls. So we have just this simple fan like you'd have in your house. They do have an exhaust fan. The exhaust fan is tied into a thermostat. So just kind of a simple thermostat like you'd have on your house, kind of like an on-off type of deal. It opens up when the greenhouse gets too hot, and it closes up when the greenhouse is getting cold. They have a unit heater. This is tied into a gas line. There are electric options available. Typically in greenhouses, you do see a lot of gas unit heaters. And then over here we have the tables. So the benches that they have for starting seeds is fairly simple. They just have pallets on top of these 55-gallon drums that are filled up with water. So the 55-gallon drums filled up with water, you might see those in some greenhouses. Those add a little bit to the thermal mass of the greenhouse, help kind of modulate temperature extremes. So they collect all the heat during the day, and then they slowly release that during the night. Okay. Can you all see my PowerPoint again? Okay, great. So to access that greenhouse systems tour, you can click on this QR code. I'll also share kind of a resource guide with links to these different resources I'm going to chat about. So sizing a greenhouse can be a little bit tricky. There are some certain things to consider. And one of the things that I often will chat with folks about are just considering the amount of non-production space that you're going to have in the greenhouse. These are things like a offset from your sidewall, offset from your end wall, different aisles that you want to walk through, your different bed widths and lengths. And we have a tool that can kind of help with determining this. So this is a greenhouse layout tool where you can kind of plug in different widths, lengths of the greenhouse. You can kind of incorporate those different non-production areas. Then you can also include like a crop yield estimate. So you can get a good idea of sort of what your output is going to be from the greenhouse that you're looking at. And again, you can click on this QR code. The QR code will download an Excel workbook, which you can kind of plug in these different numbers. So I mentioned earlier, like location is an important thing to consider, especially if you're in a mountainous region. So like the area that I work and live in, we have a lot of microclimates. So there's kind of big differences between certain aspects as far as like sunlight, as far as overall temperature and things like that. So, one tool that I've found is particularly useful is trying to find like different weather stations that are in very similar climates as the one that you'll be installing the greenhouse in. You might not have a weather station on your property, and that's okay. But if you can find something that is a comparable, that's really useful. So this is one that I use quite a bit. It's Weather Underground's Wonder Map. And it's a collection of a bunch of independent weather stations. There are a ton of them just in this little corridor within the valley that I work, where you can plug into each one of these or a particular one of them, and you can track kind of what the temperature was a year ago. You can graph kind of the temperature, humidity levels at these different elevations and different aspects. And that's a pretty useful tool to use. I think some important considerations to have when installing greenhouse are your greenhouse orientation, any sort of shading that you might have on the property, some different loads. So if you're in a high wind load, high snow load area, considering that. Drainage can also be a pretty important thing, especially when you're planting in the ground on the greenhouse. And you want to make sure that you have good drainage so you don't have waterlogged soils inside. And then also access. So being able to access that greenhouse easily, being able to get materials in and out is always an important consideration. And then here I just have kind of a sheet of some resources that I find pretty useful when considering like any sort of greenhouse advice. So University of Georgia Hobby Greenhouse Guide is a great kind of in-depth guide for hobby greenhouses. Oklahoma State University has a hobby greenhouse fact sheet, a little shorter version of it. University of Minnesota, deep winter greenhouses. So this is some more of that kind of like passive solar type of greenhouse that they are implementing up in the north. COAG Met. So I mentioned those weather stations. CSU actually has a collection of those weather stations around the state. They're a little bit further apart than kind of those independent ones, but they collect a lot of really good data. And there's a lot of really cool tools that you can use with those weather stations. I'd recommend checking out if you're interested in just seeing a greenhouse, understanding some of the systems a little bit better. CSU Spur is a great spot to go visit if you're in the Denver area, or going to visit campus if you're more in the Fort Collins area. And then also our CSU Extension staff directory. So connecting with your local CSU Extension agent is a really good thing to do if you're curious about greenhouses. We all have different skill sets and backgrounds, but when you kind of make that point of contact with your local specialist, they can reach out to our network and find the help that you need. And I also included this picture over on the left-hand side. This is at my house. So this is like starting seeds just in a windowsill. So we're taking advantage of like solar gain in our house and the environmental controls in our house. Okay, so for general questions, contacting your local extension office is a great first step. Also, you can send an email to a group of extension specialists that we have in the state, and the email address is below. And I'll plug into the chat some different hobby greenhouse resources. And this is just a Google Doc, which has links to some different resources that I find pretty useful when considering, either managing your hobby greenhouse or when you're considering building one.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. Appreciate all of that information. And give me 1 second to share my screen.
Hey, Drew, you did a great job. You covered like all the details, so thank you.
Of course, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I had some screen sharing difficulties.
Hey, if it wouldn't be a webinar if there weren't technical difficulties, but thanks for working through those and sharing that great information. So I'm going to take over now and I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about some backyard gardening practices that we can employ to extend the growing season in our own backyards, specifically for fruit and vegetable production. So my name is Chris Hilgert. I'm a horticulture specialist with CSU Extension, and I'm also the program director for the Colorado Master Gardener Program. And since it is National Volunteer Week, I also want to just give a shout out to the 1,500 plus Master Gardener volunteers in Colorado who serve 47 counties across the state. And thank you for your volunteer service and making Colorado a greener place to live and grow, and for your selfless and generous volunteer activities and contributions. Thank you for all that you do. But we're here today to talk about season extension strategies. And the reason we're talking about this is because, well, if you're new to Colorado, welcome to the temperature roller coaster that we call spring. If you're a seasoned Colorado gardener, you've experienced those glorious warm spring days that encourage those tulips and daffodils to light up the garden and remind us that spring has arrived finally, but only to be reminded that those beautiful days are followed by cold nights that dip below freezing. And of course, those of you at high elevation in our mountain areas of the state, you know, those areas are well known for their short growing seasons and challenging gardening conditions. So growing seasons that are less than 90 days can certainly limit the types of plants we can successfully grow, particularly warm season vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, melons that thrive in warm conditions, or really any crop that needs 100 days or more to harvest can be cut short from reaching its full potential. Also, extreme winter temperatures can limit the perennial crops that we can grow, like strawberries and blackberries that may lack the cold hardiness in those high elevation or mountain areas. So it's not just high elevation parts of the state, though, that can benefit from season extension practices. Even here in the Front Range, where we've experienced 90-degree days already this spring, or excuse me, 80-degree days, not 90 yet, thank goodness, but we have hit 80 already this spring, only to be followed up with a few days of snow last weekend. So this picture of our beautiful tulips blooming here in Fort Collins on the CSU campus, covered in a blanket of snow. So again, it's not just folks in the mountain regions, it's all of us in Colorado can benefit from some sort of season extension practices, because those beautiful 80-degree days certainly get us excited about gardening and getting us out there planting seeds. But you know, that snow is a reminder that maybe we should hold off a little bit or get creative so that we don't end up having to plant more than once. So we're going to talk about things like high tunnels, low tunnels, row covers, raised beds, and other things that can help address some of those challenges that we face, like wind and snow and hail and cold nights, even critters, birds, insects, and wildlife. So these season extension practices can help benefit our gardens by protecting our plants against some of those critters that might want to visit the garden. So just because it's spring, or just because we get snow this time of the year and we have this temperature roller coaster, doesn't mean we can't get out and garden. It does mean that that the weather won't make it easy on us or our gardens, and we might need to get creative in order to extend the growing season. So so the things I'm going to talk about today again are high tunnels, low tunnels, row covers, and raised beds. But I also want to talk about frost and freezing temperatures. So, these strategies work great for for protecting our plants against radiation frost. So radiation frost at the beginning and the end of the growing season tend to drop only a few degrees below freezing. We might hover, between 30 and 40 degree overnight temperatures consistently through the spring. That's where season extension practices like this can really be helpful and make a difference. We're not talking about four-season gardening here. We're not talking about protecting our plants against a cold front that moves in and temperatures drop to 0 degrees. Okay, a row cover is not going to protect our tomatoes or our lettuce and spinach to that extreme temperature. So keep in mind that there are limits to what type of the amount of protection that these covers can do. But for those radiation frost, for those cold nights, absolutely this can make a difference. So basically what happens is the soil is warmed by the sun during the day, and that's the source of heat that protects those plants from the frost at night. And the cover, we trap that heat from the soil around those young plants at night by placing a cover over the plant, such as a low tunnel or a row cover. To recharge the heat source, the soil, for the next night, any covering that does not allow sunlight to shine through to the soil should be removed in the daytime to allow that soil to warm up so that we have that heat source again for the next night. So depending on the type of material you're using and the production system you're using, you may be taking covers off. But most of the row covers do allow sunlight and air movement and water, even water through the cover. And so those are designed to be left on the plants for extended periods of time. High tunnels, of course, those are more permanent structures used for growing fruits and vegetables, even cut flowers and bedding plants, and for overwintering plant materials. So to start, let's talk a little bit more about high tunnels. You'll see these popping up at garden centers this time of the year because they provide some protection from the wind and the snow and the hail and the cold night, and keeping those annuals and perennials and vegetables healthy and looking good for consumers. High tunnels are also often called hoop houses, but they're, regardless of what you call them, they're constructed by stretching a layer of flexible plastic, polyethylene plastic, over the hoops, usually either metal or PVC hoops. There's many types of covers available, but 6 mil is kind of the industry standard. It's a good choice for our area and for mountain regions because it will hold up to the wind and the hail and the snow load. The other thing I'd mention is that UV protected film covers are a little bit more expensive, but they will extend the life of your cover by several years. And so with our high solar radiation in Colorado, it is an added expense, but it will pay off in the long run by extending the life of that cover, even though it is a higher initial cost to purchase. I do like the UV protected film covers because they do last longer. High tunnels are basically low-tech greenhouses. High tunnels typically don't have heating and cooling systems. Instead, they use passive heating and cooling. High tunnel traps the sun's heat during the day, protecting the plants from wind and cold nights throughout the year. This offers growers a way to extend the growing season for fruits, vegetables, and adding heating and cooling systems would significantly increase the cost of materials and utilities. So still, even without the heating and cooling system, for a backyard gardener, high tunnels are not cheap. And I fully recognize that high tunnels are not for everyone due to cost and the space required. Cost will depend on the size and the features, the various features available, but even a relatively small, like a 16 by 40 high tunnel can cost over $1,000 just for the material. So And then you'll find online kits reaching, prices $5,000 to $10,000, again, depending on the size and various features that are available. Your budget may be the deciding factor regarding the size you install or whether or not you install one at all. Fully recognize that cost is a limiting factor here, but recognize that some of the benefits, you don't need a 100-foot long high tunnel. You can custom build these to fit your space. You could build a 20-foot long high tunnel if that's what fits your space better. Gardeners, and particularly gardeners at high elevations in our mountain regions, can benefit from the added length to the growing season, and it can really be a game changer in terms of accumulating growing degree units and successfully growing warm season crops or crops with a 100-day growing season requirement or more to mature. Crops that would not be successfully grown outdoors in those high elevation areas, you can potentially successfully grow tomatoes and melons and peppers in a high tunnel, even at a high elevation situation. You can also successfully overwinter perennial crops like strawberries and blackberries. But before I move on to the next slide, I also want to point out a feature of this high tunnel compared to the picture on the next slide, which is, as I mentioned, we rely on passive heating and cooling. And so this time of the year, when the sun is out and it's 60 degrees outside, it can reach really high temperatures, 80, 90 degrees or warmer inside the high tunnel. So even on a cool spring day or a nice spring day, when the sun is out, we may need to vent that high tunnel to prevent overheating our cool season crops. And we typically do that by either opening the doors or rolling up the sides to vent the high tunnel. So this particular high tunnel has sides that roll up from the ground. And notice the high tunnel in this picture, the sides roll up starting at about 3 feet high. So the reason I point this out is because my personal preference is I like the high tunnel designs where the sides roll up starting at about 3 feet high, because it'll keep out critters like rabbits that could just wander in as they are checking out your garden if the sides were rolling up from the ground. So that's one of the reasons I prefer this style versus sides that roll up from the ground. Otherwise, it does still allow for good air movement and ventilation. Other benefits to growing in high tunnels include extending the growing season by several weeks on both ends, on spring and fall. So it is feasible to plant early cool season crops, followed by tomatoes or other warm season crops, maybe planted in June, and then harvested into September, followed by a third season planting of short season or cool season crops that could be harvested in October and November. And I've actually even seen, or I've actually even harvested spinach from a high tunnel in December. With no additional heating, it can be done. So these, again, we're not talking about year-round or four-season production in an unheated high tunnel. We are talking about reliable 3 seasons of production. And it's definitely feasible to grow warm season crops, but you can start with a cool season crop, follow it with a warm season crop, and then have enough time left in the year to get another cool season or short season crop built in. So it's pretty well documented that we can see season extension of the growing season by 3 to 6 weeks on both ends of the growing season. So that's an additional 42 to 84 days, depending on your location and depending on the crop. But if we live in an area that only has an 80-day growing season, an additional 42 days, that's a 50% increase in our growing season. And so, that's a significant difference. And so that's the thing that can make the difference between successfully growing and ripening a tomato or a melon or a pepper and not being able to do successfully to do that. So, any crop that needs 100+ days to mature, and you live in a high elevation area or an area that only has an 80-day growing season, high tunnels can be the solution to allowing you to grow those warm season crops. Your cool season crops will thrive in the spring and the fall, and your warm season crops will do very well during the summer months. Now, moving on to low tunnels, these are essentially smaller and less expensive high tunnels. They're enclosed structures. They're made of plastic or polyethylene, polycarbonate, or fabric covers that are placed over short hoops. And again, the same types of protection. They protect crops from the sun, the wind, excessive rainfall, hail, pest pressure, cold nights, and again, can extend the growing season significantly. Low tunnels are typically no more than 4 feet in height, but tall enough to cover the crop growing under the cover. Low tunnels, they're inexpensive, they're easy to construct, and can last multiple growing seasons. You can even install low tunnels inside a high tunnel for added protection and extending the growing season for cool season crops even earlier in the spring and later into the fall. And in gardens, they can improve your plant productivity and reduce plant or pest pressure. They do this by increasing soil and air temperatures. They protect crops against mild freezes, and they promote vegetative growth. Depending on the covering used and the crops grown, low tunnels can extend the growing season by at least a couple weeks in the spring and the fall, and potentially longer depending on the crop. So in addition to increasing temperatures in the spring and the fall, low tunnels can reduce light intensity and block wind, providing some shading effect during the warmer months. And these environmental modifications can reduce evapotranspiration rates, decrease water stress in the warmer months, and those conditions result in healthier and more productive plants. Low tunnels are typically constructed with hoops spaced 4 to 5 feet down the row or the bed. The end of the hoop is anchored about 6 inches into the soil on either side of the row or bed, usually using rebar and then bending that PVC pipe or that hoop material over the top of that rebar to anchor that hoop in place. Some other materials you might use: electrical conduit, 9-gauge wire, a 1/2-inch PVC pipe is commonly used. You can also add a top rail to connect and strengthen the hoops if needed. That's particularly helpful on long runs or long beds. The type of covering selected will depend on the purpose and of the low tunnel, but commonly used covers include spun fabric, perforated or slit plastic, so it does allow some ventilation, fine insect netting or shade cloth. So if we put some row cover or frost blankets over the low tunnel hoops early in the season, when temperatures warm up, we can easily remove that material and replace it with an insect netting or bird netting as needed, which will provide the pest protection without trapping the heat or providing the season extension benefit of the row cover or frost blanket. Spun fabric is permeable. It allows airflow. It prevents condensation within the low tunnel. But the fabric weight is going to determine the temperature increase and the season extension benefits, as well as the light transmittance and the durability of the fabric. So lightweight fabric like floating row cover is often used for pest exclusion, a little bit of wind protection. But heavier weight material, those things that are labeled as frost blankets, are often used for season extension purposes. 4 or 6 mil poly coverings, like we're using on high tunnels, create a little mini greenhouse effect and can significantly warm the soil and the air temperature for spring and fall season extension. But if a poly cover, a 6 mil poly cover is used as spring and summer temperatures rise, you do want to be careful and remove or replace it with a shade cloth as temperatures rise. Poly covers do need to be held off of the plants to prevent the plants from freezing where they touch the cover during this time of the year when temperatures might drop to around freezing at night. They do need to be opened and vented on sunny days and removed entirely if you live in a hot area during the summer months. You can also cut 2-inch holes in the sides of the plastic at 2 to 3 foot intervals to reduce overheating and allow for some ventilation under the poly cover. But again, you can remove that cover and replace it with a shade cloth, insect netting, bird netting for pest exclusion as needed through the season. Insect netting can be a good solution for cabbage worm moths, grasshoppers, and other insect pests. The downside is it also prevents bees and other pollinators from reaching the plant. So just be mindful that if you're growing a crop that does require pollination from bees, you're going to need to remove that material when those plants are in bloom so that the bees can do their jobs. Now, raised beds also offer many benefits in terms of controlled environments. And we can, as you see in this photo here, we can incorporate low tunnels over our raised beds for additional season extension. But as far as raised beds goes, one of the biggest benefits, and this isn't really related to cold controlled environments, but they make gardening more accessible for gardeners who may have trouble just bending down. So one reason raised beds are great is because it's easier on your body. And so as we age or we're gardening with a limited ability, limited mobility, raised beds can be a solution to help us be able to continue to garden. But from a gardening standpoint, the soil in the raised beds will warm up more quickly in the springtime compared to soil in-ground gardens, which will allow direct seeding of cool season plants like spinach and kale earlier in the spring. Raised beds are also a good option when the ground is too rocky to dig or the soil is poor quality and not really suitable for fruit and vegetable production. So those things mean that we're going to see increased yields, and especially if we're using block style planting versus planting in rows with aisles in between them, as we commonly do in gardens planted in the ground. Block style plantings, we plant more densely. There's more plants in the area, which means we're going to have more yield to harvest. Also, weeds are less of a problem due to plant competition from planting more densely. Soil quality is easier to manage with amendments, and the improved soil conditions, will help increase yields as well. So raised beds shouldn't be more than 4 feet wide. You don't want to have to step into the bed to harvest or pull weeds. And that also means that we don't have to worry about compacted soil, and the plant's roots are going to be able to easily grow through that really great soil in the raised bed. The length of the raised bed, the height of the raised bed, that can vary based on the location and your needs, but try to keep the raised beds 3 to 4 feet wide at the most, just for accessibility reasons. Building raised beds can be done using a variety of materials, but untreated lumber, naturally decay-resistant lumber such as cedar is recommended. And we do try to avoid using treated lumber like railroad ties or things like that that could leach into the soil. But you don't have to use wood. Concrete landscape blocks may work really well instead of wood to build your raised beds. Those aluminum trough style raised beds have also become more popular in recent years. All good options, and pick the material that works best for you. If plants are able to root into the soil below, the depth of the raised bed isn't critical, but do dig to mix the raised bed soil into the native soil and eliminate the texture interface between the two soils so that water isn't sitting up on top of the native soil and saturating that raised bed soil. We want the water to move through and drain down out of the bed easily. We also want to help encourage the rooting of the plants easily into the native soil. If the plants are not able to root into the ground below, just make sure that the bed is deep enough to accommodate the plants that you're growing. 12 inches is a good rule of thumb, but not all plants need 12 inches of rooting space, and some plants need more. So just know that you want to match your crop to the depth of the bed. And again, hoops can be added to those raised bed to create that low tunnel. It's easy to install. And again, you can get the same benefits out of that. The season extension, you can use the hoops for insect nettings, for shade cloths, for bird netting, and again, get all of the same benefits that we discussed from the low tunnels in the previous slide. Now we've gone from sort of the most expensive all the way down to the least expensive and most low-tech approach here, and that's floating row cover. So lastly, I just want to say, talk a little bit about floating row covers. So grandma's old method of covering the garden with blankets and sheets can work really well, but sheets, they don't allow sunlight through. They're cotton material, they can soak up water, and they can freeze. And if that fabric absorbs water and freezes, evaporative cooling can lead to cold temperatures adjacent to that blanket. So since they don't allow light penetration, it means that the soil heat is not recharging during the day. So blankets can work well to protect plants from a cold night, but do remove sheets and blankets from your container plants or from your vegetable garden during the day so the sun can heat up that soil to trap below that blanket the next night. But instead of sacrificing your sheets, maybe consider purchasing some floating row cover material. Floating row covers are lightweight, spun-bound polyester fabrics that lay directly over crops. Because they transmit light and allow airflow, they can provide crop protection over an extended period of time without being removed and left on your plants for a long period of time. Depending on the material and the grade, they can actually provide up to 10 degrees of frost protection for your plants. They cut the wind. They can screen out some insects. Again, for insect pollinated crops, covers should be removed for pollination to occur. Many brands, many fabric types are commercially available, but research from CSU has found that warm season crops such as tomatoes, peppers, and melons were able to be planted earlier, and yields doubled compared to planting in bare soil. So there is some extra work involved, but the extra effort is definitely worth it. They're light enough, they can lay directly on plants, so make sure you give enough slack to allow the plants to push up the material as they grow. But place bricks or pots filled with soil, rocks, or even bury the edges of the row cover to keep it from blowing away in our winds. And for insect exclusion, you will need to bury the edges of the row cover to keep those critters out. The last thing I want to note is that weeds will grow really well under those row covers as well. So don't just put it on there and forget about it. Occasionally, once a week or so, you will want to pull that material up, do some weeding, and then cover those plants back up, because while your lettuce and spinach and cabbage and other plants will do really well under your floating row covers, those weeds are going to thrive as well. So it looks like we went a few minutes over our time today. Apologize, but thank you for sticking with us. I'll we'll have time for questions as well. But before I wrap up, I would encourage you all, if you could, tell us how we did, give us your feedback, and fill out this course evaluation and let us know how we did. But I also want to say thank you to Drew and to Tammy for co-presenting with me today, and thanks to our participants for joining us as well. I'm going to stop my share and go back to the Q&A to see if we have any questions there. Or Drew, Tammy, do we have any questions that need to be answered?
Hey, Chris, I know you were going to mention Walls of Water. We just had a question, and I'm a fan of Walls of Water. I haven't used them in a little while because they all died. You want to just mention Walls of Water real quick?
Sure, yeah, and I actually took that out of my presentation because it was getting a little lengthy, but yeah, walls of water. These are typically used for warm season crops and young transplants or seedlings like tomatoes, peppers. So they work on the idea that that water warms up from the solar radiation during the day, and then as the cooler night temperatures set in, that wall of water surrounds those young tomato plants and insulates it from the wind and keeps it warm overnight. And much like the soil recharges from the sun's warmth during the day, the wall of water will do the same thing, holding that warmth into the nighttime and protecting those warm season crops from a cold night in Colorado. You generally use them early in the season, shortly after or when you transplant those tomatoes into the garden, and take them off once the risk of frost or the size of the plant outgrows the wall of water. But they can be very helpful and useful to protect our warm season plants.
You have any tricks on getting the water, on setting them up? I know sometimes you're trying to hold one side and get the water on the other and it collapses. What's your method?
Yeah, so stakes can work really well. So like I've used little wooden stakes that could be used as a trellis for sweet peas or other climbing plants to form kind of a pyramid. Like, so usually 3 stakes, and then I set the wall of water around that. And so those stakes provide the support and keep it from flopping over onto the plant. So that's one strategy that has worked well for me.
Thanks, Chris. I know that those are a little challenging to juggle at the same time.
Yeah, they can be. Kim mentioned in the Q&A, cover tomato with an upside down 5-gallon bucket, fill walls, and then remove bucket. Also, that could work as well, providing it some structure as you're filling it up and then removing it, and it should be able to stand on its own. Great. Well, and Patrick says, I've used a small tomato cage for years to hold up walls of water. Yep, same principle. Great idea. That works as well. And then your tomato cage is there, ready to go too. Win-win. See, these gardeners are so good. That's great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your time. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I'll drop my email into the chat.
Everyone did. There's some amazing questions out there. So thank you all for asking such good questions. It shows that you guys are really kind of curious and excited about growing in greenhouses. You could have all of these greenhouse structures that we all have.
You know, I didn't mention this, but one of my favorite things about a high tunnel is in January or February when it's, the hardest part of winter. You're just ready for spring. On a sunny day, you walk into the high tunnel and it's 75 degrees in there. And it's just like, oh, this is such, just bring a book, if nothing else, to sit in there and enjoy. And think about the gardening, all the gardening that you can do in the warmer months. So yeah, they're awesome for gardening, and I am definitely a believer. Okay. Well, with that, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Tammy, Drew, thank you.
Yes, thank you guys all for attending. And the next webinar will be sometime in May. We need to confirm that on hydroponics. So stay tuned for more information on that. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.